I'm Lannan, he's Giles, and this is Lannan and Giles Unscripted. Unfortunately, Giles is not with us. He had a last minute situation come up, but he will be back with us next week. But we had already arranged a guest that's been on my LarryandFishers.com podcasts before. We've talked about some of his books. Mark Montieth, it's always great to talk to you. Welcome to our podcast.
Great to be with you, Larry.
You know, you've written several books, and I just want to kind of go over some of the books you've written with a distinctive local flavor in sports. You've written a book called Extra Innings, My Life in Baseball about Max Schumacher. Max Schumacher is probably one of the most respected minor league executives, actually maybe minor league, just minor league sports executives in general, did great work with the Indianapolis Indians. You've also written a book about Gene Cady, Passion Play, a season with the Boilermakers. The one book you wrote that we did two podcasts on before, Reborn, the Pacers and the Return of Pro Basketball to Indianapolis. Man, I recommend that book to anybody who wants a history of professional basketball all the way back to the days when the sporting goods stores sponsored little league
Yeah, the
teams.
M
That was
Rose.
M. Rose did it. That was pro basketball before the NBA came along. Your most recent book is Vukovic, The Man Who Wouldn't Lift. You edited that from notes from Angelo Angelopoulos, who died sadly at a young age. So we may bring some of that stuff up later. But I want to talk about the Pacers because that's always been. You've worked for the Pacers. You've written as a sports writer for the Star as well as your books. And I have to tell you something that came to my mind that I really like your take on it. Because when I saw the Pacers in that ceremony when they won the Eastern Division Championship to go on to the finals this past season, I really was moved by Herb Simon accepting that Bob Cousy trophy. And a lot of sports writers and sportscasters went back to Larry Bird, Reggie Miller, a championship team that went to the finals and unfortunately lost to the Lakers. My memory went back even further than that. It went back to 1983. I was working for Network Indiana Radio, and they'd assigned me to go to the airport because Bill Hudnut, the mayor at the time, was coming back from New York City, and he just met with the commissioner of the NBA at that time, David Stern, and came back and told the assembled press, "We have an owner. The ownership is fine with the NBA. Pacers will stay here." It came out a few days later. It was the Simon brothers. What I'd like you to talk about, because I thought that was a major turning point that brought us to that championship, those two Eastern Division championships that we had. As a historian that's looked at this, and you and I have talked about this before, but I'd like to bring it up again. I think it's timely. Just how close Indianapolis was to losing the Pacers in 1983.
Yeah, very close. No question. There was an offer on the table. Sam Nassi represented a group that previously owned the Pacers. They did not have the financial wherewithal to run the team, particularly in a winning way. They couldn't afford the better players, frankly. So there was an offer from a group to move it to Sacramento. And the Simon stepped in at the last minute and saved it. A buzzer beating 3-pointer, so to speak, to keep the franchise here. I've talked with the guy who headed up the group that wanted to move the team, and they wound up going to Kansas City first. But there was an offer on the table to move the Pacers out of town. If you could imagine the Sacramento Pacers, how that would sound to people here, it'd be painful, given the ABA history of the team. So Simons, there weren't many people in Indianapolis and perhaps nobody else but the Simon brothers who could afford to buy the franchise. Even then it took a lot of money, and the Simons did it. And they went to Pacer games at the Coliseum in the ABA days. They were kind of fans, but not hardcore. They grew up in Brooklyn and didn't play basketball. They weren't athletes, so it wasn't in their blood, but they did it as a civic gesture. And Mayor Hudnut kind of impressed upon them the importance of it. And it was, I'm sure, a good business move for them, and they recognized that. But still, they didn't have to do it. And if they had not done it, I don't think we would have the Pacers in Indianapolis today.
Well, my normal partner is Duncan Giles. Duncan, as a young man, worked as ball boy for the visiting teams for the Pacers, and all about around that
Mhm.
time. And the one point he always makes to me about that period, he says, "I worked for Sam Nassi and I worked for the Simons." He goes, "It was the difference between night and day once the Simons took it over. Just a whole different outlook, and just so much better for the people working for the Pacers at that time." Was that your take as well?
Yeah. Yeah, Sam Nassi lived in California. He lived in LA, and he was a guy who made his money by buying distressed businesses and turning them over, that kind of thing. And he was strictly in it for the money. And really, he kind of represented different ownership. It wasn't really him. He was the front man for it. But Jerry Buss owned the Pacers. He, in effect, owned two NBA franchises, the Lakers and the Pacers at the same time, which is amazing. But I think David Stern let it happen just to keep the franchise alive in Indianapolis a little longer. But the sale needed to happen, and nobody liked Sam Nassi, and nobody liked the guys he brought in the front office. I know Slick Leonard had conflicts with guys who were brought in, and it just wasn't going well. The team wasn't good. They couldn't afford to keep their better players. And of course, the price of entering the NBA was so steep that it kind of stripped the Pacers bare anyway. So it was a tough time. And actually, I think a good book idea, and I've suggested this to others, is those years in the early 80s when they were winning 20, 22, 26 games and the ownership transferred and they were just fighting to keep the doors open every day. Had a staff of like 12 people in the front office, and Nancy Leonard's running the front office and Slicks the GM and coach. Uh, just how they kept it going. It was not easy. And a lot of dedicated people did keep it going. I think that'd be a great story. I don't have time to do it myself, otherwise I would. But somebody could pick up that ball and run with it because I think it's a great story. And a lot of the people who were with the franchise then are still around, and I'd be happy to direct people to them if they wanted to do that. But it was a pretty dramatic time in franchise history, just keeping it going.
The one thing I mention to people is that remember it was 1984 when Bob Irsay decided to move the Colts from Baltimore to Indianapolis. He had some other options, Phoenix being one of them at the time. I wonder if Bob Irsay would have moved the Colts to Indianapolis if Indianapolis had just lost its NBA team.
No, that's a good question. Probably not. It would have been a black mark for sure. I think, the ABA success of the Pacers, the championships, kind of got Market Square Arena built. That revitalized downtown. The Pacers moved downtown. That kind of led to the construction of the Hoosier Dome. And having a facility there obviously made it possible for the Colts to move to Indianapolis. If that dome isn't there, obviously it's not going to happen. So there's a ripple effect. And the Pacers really had a lot to do with what downtown is today by their success in the ABA. So you could make a good argument that without the Pacers surviving and playing downtown, the Colts would not have moved here.
Let's talk about the Pacers because there's just some recent news that has come out, not recent, but at least in the last few weeks and months. And this is fairly recent. Rick Carlisle just received a contract extension. I would assume that's no big surprise.
No, I get the only part that was a surprise to me is that I thought he had signed an extension just a couple of years ago, and I didn't realize it was even needed. But it certainly looks like Rick Carlisle will retire as a Pacers coach. He can kind of call his own shots. He'll leave when he wants to. I believe he's 65 years old, if I remember correctly, and he's going to do this as long as he wants to. The interesting thing about Rick to me, I covered the Pacers for the Star when he was here as an assistant coach to Larry Bird and then as a head coach in the early 2000s. And of course, he coached a team that won 61 games in 2004. And that's still a franchise record for victories in a season. But Rick has really adjusted or evolved. When he was a coach the first time with the Pacers, he was a micromanager, very conservative. As a reflection of his conservative nature, I remember that season, he literally wore a white shirt every game. He never branched out into a blue shirt or any kind of different color. It was a white shirt every game. And of course, back then, coaches wore suits and ties before COVID. Um, and he was very controlling, calling out plays. I could remember a game, a home game, and this is when reporters got to sit courtside. Pacers kind of had a run going, got a couple quick baskets. They rebounded a miss, and Tinsley is running the ball up the court, looking to make something happen. And Carlisle stands up and holds up his arms and goes, "Hold up!" And Tinsley held up and literally rolled his eyes, like, "Oh no, come on!" and and the players were frustrated. Our test got frustrated with the offense. I referred to it as a paint by numbers offense, just very diagrammed and calling plays, no freelance activity at all. And Rick obviously now runs the most freelance system in the league, up tempo and, a lot of freedom for the players. And he has said the reason he's made that switch is that when he coached in Dallas, he had Jason Kidd. And he realized at some point, hey, this is a great player. He's smart. I need to give him the reins of the offense. So credit Rick for adjusting. A lot of coaches can't do that. They're stuck in their ways. But Rick, and the transformation for the kind of coach he was then to what he is now is pretty remarkable. And he's made other changes too of being less paranoid. Rick used to call me as the beat writer and suggest things or plant seeds. If I called him for a comment about something, he would want me to read it back to him and make sure it sounded right, and he might tweak it, this kind of thing. And he's a lot more relaxed now and confident. He's won a championship, and that helps a lot. He knows he's established. He's not going to get fired if they have a bad stretch or whatever. So it's just been interesting for me to see the transformation he's made from then to now.
And the NBA, and I'd like you to kind of talk about this, having been around the sport, covering it closely for a while. The NBA has a reputation for being a players' league. There are some kind of sports where the coaches have an awful lot of power. And in the NBA, it's mostly with the marginal players who need playing time. That's the biggest, probably, power that a coach has in the NBA. But when you're dealing with the stars, it is sort of a different relationship. Do you think that Rick Carlisle as a coach has adjusted to this idea that whether you like it or not, the NBA is pretty much a players' league?
I think so. I think so. And that's what really the better coaches have done. You look back at the teams that win championships, first of all, they have stars, not just stars, but superstars, first team all NBA guys, obvious Hall of Famer guys. You think of the Lakers teams, the Celtics team, the Pistons, whatever, Golden State more recently. So, he figured that out. He realizes that you got to let your great players play. And it's that way in anything, hey, Brian Epstein did not tell the Beatles how to play music. He did not micromanage that. You run a certain part of it as the coach and you organize things. And yeah, you have control over playing time and other issues, but you got to let the performers perform if they have proven their greatness. And it's really the only way to go about it in basketball. And I know a lot of older NBA fans are nostalgic about 40 years ago, whatever, and don't think the game is as good today. I disagree. I think the talent's better than ever from top to bottom. Uh, you may not like the lack of a post-step game, but to me, the centers have expanded their skills and they step out. It's a faster paced game. The shooters are better than ever. The three-point shooting is too good, really. I mean, they've hacked the game where the game does have too many three-point shots. I think that when they're that good, you've got to use the three-point line. Why shoot twos when you got guys hitting 40% from three? So the game, is really good today, even if it's not like it used to be. And the better coaches like Rick Carlisle understand that, and they let the players go. And you can still, you still have control over who starts and who plays in minutes and that kind of thing. And, you still have a lot of authority. And if you've won like Rick has, you have the backing of management, and the players know that. So it works, it works. And that Pacer team of last year, they didn't win a championship, but I don't know that I've ever seen a team that grabbed the public's attention and affection like that one. I mean, here we are in August, and as I'm sure it's the same for you as you go out in the community, people are still talking about that team. They loved watching the team, the way they moved the ball, the way they played together, the consistent effort, and of course the drama they produced with all those game-winning shots. The Pacers, although they had three ABA championship teams, they had another team get to the finals in 2000. I don't know that they've ever had a team that had the public's affection like this most recent one.
It's interesting. I look back 40 years ago, and there's no way I would trade the game they're playing today to 40 years ago. That's just me. It's been a fast basketball fan for years. I'm not really been a journalist covering the NBA, but I certainly love the style of play today. I certainly agree with you on that. I do want to bring up something you alluded to, expectations, because if you look at the playoffs that the Pacers went all the way to the final game, we went 7 games in the finals. The Pacers' expectations going into every series, Mark, was very low. I mean, the national press gave them almost no chance to win almost um, every series they were in, and they continued to exceed those expectations. And we will always wonder what would have happened in Game 7 if Halliburton hadn't come
Mm.
up short. And I think the team fought pretty hard even without him, but they just couldn't come up with a Game 7 win without him. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And also now, as the team goes into the 25-26 season, where Halliburton is not likely to play at all, they're once again playing this expectation game. So talk a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about how the Pacers in recent years have really exceeded those expectations. I kind of revel in that.
Yeah, the last two seasons, they, have exceeded expectations. They got to the conference finals 2 seasons ago, into the finals last year or last season. And that's what really excites fans is when a team exceeds expectations. You think about it, most teams, once they establish themselves, expectations rise, and fans often wind up being disappointed, frustrated when they don't meet that. And there aren't that many seasons when fans are truly excited about a team and surprised by a team's success and really happy with it. And these last two Pacer teams have been that. The Pacers were the betting underdog in every game in the finals against OKC, and they won three of those games. And that Game 7 will just be remembered forever by Pacer fans. But Halliburton off to a great start, hits three-pointers, and then has that injury. It's just heartbreaking, and it brings up the ultimate what if. If that had not have happened, you could make, it would have been a great game. I know that much. You can't guarantee a win, but it would have been a great game. And he was confident and feeling good. Um, as a kind of a side note here, and you may have seen this, but I texted Rick Carlisle before Game 7, and because I remembered knowing the fact that the Pacers won all three of their ABA titles on the road. Slick Leonard always had a saying with his players: walk out there like you own the damn place. And one of the great things he did was give confidence to his players. He had a swagger about him. And he always said, walk out there like you own the damn place. And I texted that thought to Rick before Game 7. Hesitated to do it. That's not something you normally do as a reporter, but I don't cover the team now. I mean, I'm semi-retired and on to other things. And Rick actually, I heard him on the radio later. He told the players that Slick Leonard, hey, this coach won three championships. And they did that. They walked out there like they owned the damn place and got off to a lead. And Halliburton's off to that start. And then he has that injury. So it was just so sad, but still made for a great season. And that to lead into the second part of your question, this coming season, you know, they're probably not going to be as good without Halliburton, but I do think that they will once again exceed expectations. Expectations are going to be lower. I think that Nemhard, given that point guard role from day one, will play well. I guess he's not as good a passer as Halliburton, not as good a three-point shooter, but he's still a really good player. And I go back to when the Pacers played the Celtics in the conference finals 2 seasons ago, Halliburton was injured and sat out the last two games. And in those two games, Nimhard had 26 and 28 points. You go back to his performance as a starter when Halliburton has been out, it's been good. I mean, he can be a starting point guard in the league. Um, they lose Miles Turner, uh, and that doesn't bother me. Turner, his entire game was kind of based on 3-point shooting. And if he wasn't shooting well from the 3-point line, he might block a couple of shots, but he really wasn't helping you. He was a subpar rebounder, not just a physically tough guy. And I don't blame him for that. He reflected his upbringing. He's a suburban kid from Dallas, great family, but, he wasn't tough, not physically tough. So they will replace him, at least at first, by committee. But I like the group of centers they have. So I really do think the Pacers will be better this coming season than people expect. And I think the fans can latch onto them once again. I think they'll be a playoff team. I don't know how far they can go. And of course, it depends on what injuries they have in the upcoming season. But I do think that they once again can be a surprising team because I think the talent will be better than what people expect.
And the fans were up in arms, and Miles Turner is signed with another team. But your point is very well taken. This is what always fascinates me because this is how the game has changed. You didn't often see a big man who's a 3-point shooter. And you're right, he wasn't the traditional big man you would see in the NBA in the past. He played his role, but we'll have to see whether the Pacers are able to actually overcome that. And I think that the fans will see that the team will still be a fun team to watch. And what you hope is that they'll be competitive and they'll be and I do think that as you said, the way that Carlisle coaches his teams, they will be a fun team to watch for the fans. That's what I would expect. Would you expect the same?
Yes, and I think the main thing is without Turner, they should be a better rebounding team. And the rebounding was their primary weakness last year. They were the third worst rebounding team in the NBA and the second worst offensive rebounding team in the NBA. And no matter who they have at center next year, whether it's Wiseman, who I really think has great potential, or Isaiah Jackson or Huff, who they acquired from Memphis, they'll be a better rebounding team, and they will get more lob passes for dunks, and they'll just be better around the basket. And I think, though, that will serve them well. The rebounding is so important, and offensive rebounding is incredibly important. And when you're the second worst offensive rebounding team in the league, you are not taking advantage of your shooting ability. The Pacers had one of the higher field goal percentages in the league last year, but really didn't take advantage of it because they usually got just one shot. If you get two shots per trip or more, you're almost certainly going to score. So I think they will be just about as good offensively, if nothing else, by getting more shots. And that's, you think offensive rebounding is really undervalued, I think, by a lot of fans. Some of the greatest moments in franchise history came on shots off of offensive rebounds. The three-pointer Byron Scott hit in Orlando to win game one of that series came off an offensive rebound. The three-pointer that Travis Best hit in game 5 against Milwaukee in the first round in 2000 came off an offensive rebound and ball reversal. And I can go on and on. It's so important to get a second shot. And there'll be a lot more second and perhaps third shots next season. And that will be a huge help.
Yeah, it's something that you said about Slick Leonard's stuck in my mind because I remember Sparky Anderson, I think it's another sport, but same concept, saying one time that, we won that first World Series championship in Boston. But he said, I understand the fans want to be a part of it, and I get that. But as far as the players go and the team goes, he says it's much more satisfying and enjoyable to win the championship on the road because you can enjoy it. And you really have a responsibility to sort of share it with the fans at home because actually we don't want to, dispense with that. We understand that's an important part of the game, but at least for us, winning that first World Series championship on the road was good for us. Have you heard that before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is something to that. There's also a certain pressure that comes with winning a game 7 or a closeout game at home because of the expectations, what we were just talking about. You were supposed to win those games. The Pacers won three ABA titles, couldn't see them on the road two of those years in 1970 and 73. They could have won it at home. They had a game six or a game five at home, or if they had won, they would win the championship. They had champagne on ice in the locker room. They're ready to have a big celebration at home. Television cameras set up in the locker room, and they couldn't do it. They kind of gagged each time. The pressure. They assumed too much, probably, and that could have happened at OKC. If Halliburton doesn't get hurt, the Pacers still led that game at halftime, and as that game progressed, and if the Pacers are winning it or right there, the pressure really mounts for OKC, and it would be. I think it's just it's like winning a battle in a war, man. You go into someone else's territory and beat them, and you're the champion, and then you can come home and celebrate and have the parade and everything like that. I think it is a great feeling for the athletes to do that because you have overcome expectations. You have ruined somebody else's party in their home, and you can take a certain amount of pride in that.
Something that I heard Oscar Robertson say when I was a young man, and when you talked about rebounding, it stuck with me, and I'd like to hear your views on this because he once said, when you get, and this was a long time ago, but I think it's largely true today. He said, you get to the NBA because you can score for the most point. You're able to score points. That's how you get to the NBA. But the teams that win in the NBA are the teams that rebound and play defense. That's still true today,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it?
I think so. Sure. I mean, 3-point shooting is vital now. You've got to have a 3-point shooting team. You can't trade 2 for 3 very long and win. So you have to have 3-point shooting. And that can kind of overcome bad defense, but you still have to rebound. And rebounding isn't just about your big men. With all the 3-point shots that are taken these days, so many of the misses bounce out 15 feet from the basket. So your guards got to rebound. It truly has to be a team effort. That's pretty obvious. And so when I talk about Miles Turner and the Pacers like a rebounding, it's not all on him. The guards also have to go after the ball. And the dilemma is that you also have to get back on defense. So do your guards go in to get a rebound or go back and try to be back for transition defense? But still, you've got to rebound the ball, no question. You can't give up too many second and third shots, and you've got to get some yourself. And I think the game is often won in that area.
You also write for the Indianapolis Business Journal. You do a column for them, I think, in every other issue. And I don't want you to give too much up, but you are working on a piece about this whole issue of the starting quarterback for the Colts. And there's a whole interesting story behind that. I'm just curious where you think you're headed in terms of trying to analyze this quarterback decision that the Colts have made.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch this play out. The Colts drafted this quarterback a couple of years ago with the fourth overall pick, and he seems to have this incredible potential. Great athlete, strong, can run, but raw. And here we are going into his third season. He's been injury prone. And so, do you start the more experienced guy who might give you a better chance to win a game, next weekend, or do you give the younger guy another season to develop? And I appreciate the difficulty of that decision for the Colts, and certainly their general manager and coach, Ballard and Steichen, are on the hot seat, and they've got to have a good season. If they don't make the playoffs, they very likely lose their jobs. Whether they should or not, I don't know, but that would be the case. And keep in mind, we have basically a new owner with Carly Ursay running the team now. So, but I think if you're not a team that can contend for a championship or go deep in the playoffs, you need to find out what you have with these young guys. You invested so much in Anthony Richardson, and you're going to leave him on the bench. If Jones is fortunate enough to have a healthy season, Richardson isn't going to play much, and you'll never know what you have. And are you going to re-sign him after he rides the bench for a year? Will he never get another chance? If that happens, he's going to wind up going to another franchise And who knows what happens there, and how painful would it be for him to blossom elsewhere after you got so little out of him after investing so much in him. So it's just an interesting dilemma in my mind. And I kind of want to link it to other decisions that are similar. And if you talk about the Pacers, Reggie Miller as a rookie came off the bench every game but one. John Long was the starter, and Long missed one game. So Reggie started a road game up in Chicago, I think it was late in the year. And nobody argued about that. Reggie Miller goes to college 4 seasons at UCLA and comes in and spends the season on the Pacer bench as a rookie. And that's kind of how it was done back then. But I look back on it now, I think, why? Why would you not be playing your rookie Reggie Miller, your lottery pick, instead of John Long, who was a veteran, past his prime at the time? Because you're not going to win a championship anyway. That was a sub 500 team, I believe. And we're talking about the 87, 88 season. Why would you not be giving your rookie more of a chance right away? I don't think you would have stunted his growth or ruined his confidence when he made the adjustment to NBA basketball. And that kind of the same with Paul George. He came in as a lottery pick and was brought along very slowly. Jim O'Brien was the coach then. Of course, Jim O'Brien's trying to keep his job, so he wants to win every game and doesn't want to lose games by playing the rookie. But for the franchise, it seems to me better to play the young guy to find out what you have. And you know what? If Anthony Richardson bombs out and the Colts have a poor season, well, then you get a higher draft pick. And in the long run, that is going to be really valuable. So I understand Steichen and Ballard don't want to tank. They want to keep their jobs. They want to win every game possible. And Daniel Jones perhaps gives them a better chance to do that right now. But if I'm ownership or management, I guess if I'm ownership, I'm thinking, let's play Richardson. And, you could yank him if he's playing poorly, or if he has a couple bad games, then make a change and make Jones the starter. But I don't want Anthony Richardson playing off the bench in his third season and perhaps for the entire season and never finding out what we have in this kid.
One last thing, your most recent book is Vukovic, The Man Who Wouldn't Lift. Again, you did a pretty heavy lifting editing job on that. You and your wife had to step through some I can't imagine going through somebody else's notes when he intended to use that to write his own book. And that's what you had. And a couple of sports writers had passed on that possibility because the notes were in such bad shape. You give your wife a lot of credit for going through those notes and getting them ready for you so you could write that book. So I assume Vukovic, The Man Who Wouldn't Lift, is still available.
Yes, it is. Certainly on Amazon. It's available, I think, in the local bookstores still. It's available at, I think there are still copies at Curlis Jewelers on 86th Street and also at Three Sisters in a Trunk on Main Street in Speedway. Um, and it was a fun project, Larry. I learned about Angelo Angelopoulos, who was a close friend of Vukovic's and who wrote the original manuscript. And he was really talented and, from all accounts, a really good guy. And he died of leukemia at the age of 43 in 1962, just a tragic life. And I wanted to kind of honor him, or I took a lot of pride in finishing the job for him. I was 7 years old when he died. I didn't know him, but it would have been great to get to know a guy like that. And I was really happy to be able to finish his work. I was able to write a prologue about Angelo because he's got his own dramatic and tragic story. And then I wrote an epilogue to bring the Vukovic story up to date, all that happened since Bill Vukovic was killed in that 1955 race. So I really enjoyed the project. The book has done well. I think we're actually real close to a break-even point financially, which, as you know, these days, that's
Not too
sometimes
bad.
all you could hope for.
Mhm.
I'm the publisher of the book, so I paid all the printing costs and so forth. So I really enjoyed it, and I think it'll continue to sell for a while as word gets out there. Gosh, I wish more people in Fresno were aware of it. That's where Vukovic is from. Haven't been able to really tap that market, but it's done well here, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback on it. When I go to the racing memorabilia shows or other places, a lot of people tell me that, man, I really like that book. So, and I give credit to Angelo for that. So, I really enjoyed doing it. And regardless of what the final sales tally is, I'm certainly glad I did do it. And it was just a fun and I thought worthwhile project.
Well, it's long overdue. I do think that the students and the people who study the Indianapolis 500, many of them will tell you Vukovic may have been the best driver to ever race in the Indianapolis 500, and you captured that. Mark
I
Montieth,
should add, I think the book it
good.
should be available also at the New Speedway Museum, and I encourage anybody to go to that museum. They've done a great job with it out there.
They spent a lot of time refurbishing it, and it's good to see. I'm looking forward to going to see it myself. Mark Monteith, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you'll come back and see us again when I can bring Duncan Giles back, and you two can
And,
commiserate about the old Pacer days. But it's great to have you. And Duncan Giles, my normal partner, hopefully will be back next week. But in the meantime, this is Lannan and Giles, and we'll be back again in a week from now.